Hi, my name is Thomas Upton, and this is Upton Speaks. In this podcast, I speak on a variety of topics: public media, film, commercial television, radio, politics, and more. I will occasionally feature special guests to cover some of these topics. Today's special guest is a state representative from Massachusetts, Hannah Bowen. Hannah, welcome to Upton Speaks.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
You're welcome. Tell us about yourself and your role.
Yeah, so I am a resident of Beverly here and lucky enough to represent Beverly and about half of Wenham in the Massachusetts State House. So I came into this role about a year ago after serving as a city councilor in Beverly and a career in the nonprofit world, mostly working on policy and advocacy, and most recently running the Community Mediation Center that serves all of Essex County. So I grew up on the North Shore and have had this career path and life path that took me all over the world, but really always kind of focused on how to solve problems as a community, and that has led me to this point now.
What are among the non-profit organizations you contributed to?
Yeah, so I've worked for several over my career. I was a Peace Corps volunteer early on, which is a government organization, but I was supporting a local nonprofit that was doing conservation work and supporting a community in rural Ghana on ecotourism and helping the community find some economic value in conserving a natural habitat that was really special. We had bird watching visitors. But then I did a significant amount of work after grad school on global health policy and communications for development. So I was in nonprofits like Malaria No More, an organization called Results, leading work, trying to connect people to their elected officials to help shape global health policy. And that really inspired me to come back to the North Shore and get more involved in local politics myself.
And Ghana, that's Ghana Mass, right?
No, so that's Ghana in West Africa. So I was in a small town about 3 hours outside of the capital, Accra, for 2 years early in my career. And the Peace Corps has changed since that time, but still is a really wonderful service organization giving Americans of all ages and backgrounds the opportunity to serve in other countries and sort of learn new cultures, share a bit about American life and history and ideals, and contribute to economic development as well.
When were you appointed?
Yeah, so this was a unique election coming into this role. Our previous state representative, who was reelected in the last regular election in November 2024, was then appointed to be a district court judge. And that's an incredible opportunity. He's well suited to that role. And so he moved into that role at the beginning of 2025, and there was a special election called. So it was a quick turnaround to decide in December of 2024 that I would get into that election when it was announced he would be taking up that role and there would be a vacancy. And then the final election was in May last year. So I've just crossed the 1 year mark in office.
Who makes the calls around Massachusetts laws?
So I like to think that we all do in some way. It really is our state government, our commonwealth, and we're all represented. And so I try and, in moving into this role, I've really been trying hard to connect everyone in Beverly and Wenham with the opportunities we have to shape state laws. Formally, it is a very complex process, and I'm still learning some of the details myself. It's not all written down. Some of it is informal, and some of it has been written down in our state constitution and in the rules of the legislature and the executive branch and the courts for a very long time. So we have a couple hundred years plus of history in evolving these institutions. But at the end of the day, the role of an individual representative is to bring the perspectives, the experiences, the needs, the goals of their community up to the State House, where laws originate as bills filed in the House of Representatives and or the Senate. They make their way through a committee process. So this term, I have been serving on the Housing Committee, the Transportation Committee, the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, and the Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight. So those are all joint committees of the House and Senate. We hear testimony from residents, experts, folks who have experience with the specific issues that bills are filed on, and then vote as committees whether to recommend those bills move forward, make changes to the text, or set them aside to be worked on further. And then they move from there, sometimes to a second or third committee for further deliberation. It can be quite a slow process moving through. But we've also moved some pretty substantial legislation this session already that made it through that committee process, was refined, balanced needs that were represented by the representatives and senators from across the state, and were able to pass both the House and the Senate and move on to the governor's desk to be signed into law. And that happens every 2-year session. And we as residents really guide what those priorities are, how fast they move, and what the final changes and updates to law look like. And the Massachusetts general laws have been slowly evolving over the whole history of this Commonwealth. So, for example, this year we passed a bill that changed a lot of terminology used in Massachusetts laws that has become outdated. So, some of the laws on the books right now were put in place by residents of Massachusetts many years ago and don't feel like they fit as well anymore. So we are responsible for bringing those issues up, moving them through that legislative process, and putting them on the books.
Could you please tell us some of the old terms followed by the replacement new terms?
Yeah, so the bill that we passed most recently was mainly focused on introducing people-first language around people with intellectual disabilities, people with a variety of disabilities that showed up in Massachusetts state law in a lot of different ways. So some of the terminology just doesn't really mean anything anymore. Some became offensive over time. Some just hasn't kept pace with the range of diagnoses and accommodations that people need and that we want to be represented in our laws. So it was actually a multi-year process of committee staff from the relevant committees and legislators who really focused on that review, going through and finding a lot of different terminology and then putting in replacements that are, broad, that make sure that rights and protections and services apply to everyone in the state who should be able to access them, that don't use any offensive terms, and that are kind of medically accurate, scientifically accurate, and reflect the values that we want our laws to include. So.
Why is Massachusetts the only state in this country to ban amateur fireworks?
Yeah, this one's a great question, and I will admit, I know you had flagged in advance this would come up, so I did have a chance to do a little homework. It's one of those topics that I've sort of always taken for granted. I grew up in Massachusetts, although I've traveled a lot of other places and lived in other states. It never really crossed my mind that we were that much of an anomaly or how it came to be. And I think it really is a good example of, historical paths that, we make a decision at one point, and then it's up to the residents of the state to decide if and when we revisit that decision. So some states have never really regulated fireworks. Some states had more restrictive laws on the books and have changed them. It sounds like the last real batch of changes was about 12 years ago, when the last 3 or 4 states that had total bans, like Massachusetts, gave some more leniency to mostly allow sparklers and small kind of handheld. There's a term that I grabbed the note for. Safe and sane fireworks is the term that's used in 18 states now. So they allow just a really small pool of fireworks-related consumer fireworks, and it's 29 states that don't have much in the way of regulation that will allow you to buy or use fireworks of most kinds. And for Massachusetts, from what I gather, it's one of those laws that was put on the books a fairly long time ago. I think it was the 40s that there was a discussion about fireworks becoming available, and for public safety and public health reasons, wanting to restrict them. And it hasn't been revisited up to now to the point where it would actually be changed. And I think the reason for that is anytime we're going to go and implement a new law or adjust a standing law and amend it, change it, we have to look at the cost and benefit of that. And so there hasn't, up to now, been a real compelling reason why we would want to allow more fireworks usage and give up what we have as a really strong track record of greater health and safety outcomes. So the latest from the state fire service folks is the statistic that the per capita rate of fireworks injuries in Massachusetts is about 1/5 the national rate, or 20% of the national rate. So that's something I think we can be proud of, that our fire safety professionals, our public safety professionals aren't having to deal with large numbers of accidents and injuries, and that, while in other states there may be some tax revenue from sales, or there may be some benefits that they see, that we're not deciding to make that trade-off. So that's what I've seen so far. And I think a lot of the advocacy for keeping our laws the way they are has come from healthcare professionals, fire safety professionals, folks who really want to see that public benefit from continuing to ensure that the only fireworks displays we see in Massachusetts legally are the ones done by trained professionals who get permits, who have all the safety equipment they need, who are working with fire safety professionals. And I know around here on the North Shore, especially around 4th of July, but also here in Beverly during homecoming and other times in the year, we really enjoy and have a tradition of those professional fireworks displays. And so for me, that's always been enough.
Despite the ban, people in Massachusetts would set them off anyway. Yet commercial fireworks, they're more dangerous than amateur fireworks. Basically, in other words, like commercial fireworks would have more possible injuries.
Yeah, and I think making sure we're keeping up with the regulations on commercial use, so that our firefighters have the tools they need to keep people safe, and so that the folks who are getting permits to use commercial fireworks and to transport, so you need permits for trucks that are transporting commercial grade fireworks, for the barges that we use here when we're doing fireworks displays out in the harbor. and for the displays themselves, that we're keeping pace with what the technology is, because you're right, the commercial grade displays do carry real risks, and so making sure that we have a good handle on what those risks are, and have the tools available to manage them. I think that's really important. And on the enforcement side, I think the fact that people will still go to neighboring states and buy fireworks where they are legal and transport and use them here, even though that transport and that use is not legal in Massachusetts, is something we just have to sort of keep at and think about. How do we make sure our neighbors understand what the laws are and why they are still on the books? Listen to our firefighters and our public safety and health officials. There are guidelines for safe use that are really clear and need to stay clear on the commercial side. It's harder to keep up, I think, on the consumer use, where you don't know if people have even read through the instructions on the box.
What is the penalty for amateur fireworks in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so it's a little different for sale versus possession or use. That's true for a lot of things that are regulated or illegal. So the penalty for unlawful sale, and I had to print out the details myself, is a fine from $100 to $1,000. There can be fine or imprisonment or both, depending how severe an infraction it is. So somebody selling some fireworks they picked up somewhere to a friend versus the whole store trying to go into business would have different penalties. And the fireworks themselves are always seized. But for possession or use of fireworks, it's just the potential of a fine and then confiscation of the fireworks themselves. And the fine is lower, from $10 to $100. So it's really designed not to be punitive if people aren't aware of the rules and happen to have something they thought was legal but isn't, or for people who are doing small scale, backyard family kind of displays, that it's really designed to remind people of the law and why it's there, and provide that tool for public safety to seize fireworks. So that sort of thing typically happens when neighbors are disturbed, when people are using fireworks in a way that is unsafe, and it's that way for us to remind each other that we've decided as a state to prioritize safety. And so our public safety officials are empowered to impose those smaller but meaningful fines for people who are just possessing or using fireworks, and the more meaningful fines, and even up to imprisonment for folks who are breaking the law in a larger way through sales.
What if Massachusetts were to have similar laws to what Connecticut has, where in Connecticut you must have a license to buy amateur fireworks?
Yeah, and I believe Connecticut's also part of that group of states that don't allow all kinds of fireworks, but allow what are generally considered to be the safer sorts of things. So it might be something on the ground that doesn't actually go up in the air, things that are lower temperature, things like that. So I think the biggest change would be an increase in risks and some increase in tax revenue and the sales tax on those things, depending how much they cost, how popular they were, and that we were collecting that sales tax. I think the increase in risk, the fear is that we would start to see, the kinds of levels of injuries that other states with those kinds of policies see. And as I said, we're at about 20% of the injuries that other states see on average. And so the injuries we have are from people who are unlawfully using. As you said, that does still happen. And so it would just increase exponentially based on what we've seen in other states.
And is Connecticut another of the states that uses the term safe, insane fireworks?
I believe so. Yeah. And it's an interesting, these legal terms can be, again, they come from sometimes historical uses and keeping pace with, what is a firework that can be used safely, what can, are there improvements in technology? One of the things that I think is interesting happening around here more and more is for communities who are going to do a large display to do something like a drone show. That technology is advancing quickly, and you can do really cool light shows with a lot more precision than a fireworks display, but that same kind of feeling of something really big and dramatic. You could think about during homecoming or another event like that, where you gather people and you get to see that really beautiful display, that big display, that something that brings community together with a lot less of the risk. So, I think the opportunity to evolve how we think about these things and why we want to use them, what we want to use them for, what exists, what's safest for the community, because it's not just the person who's making the decision about whether they want to have some fireworks at home. It's the neighbors around them who might face some of the consequences.
I think the term should have been called in-safe fireworks. Basically, insane, safe.
Mm-hmm. And, I think I'd be interested to hear more about what we could use that would be a safe firework. Do you have thoughts on?
No, it was just a more combination word term I came up with. In safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's hard to know what to call any of these things. But yeah, that term, I don't know why it took off in so many state laws, but it's become kind of the legal standard for that difference between small, reasonably safe, but I think it's hard to call them really safe, and the states that have no restriction whatsoever.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I want to say thank you for raising an issue that is one I hadn't thought about that deeply before. And it's a good example of when I said that all of us have a responsibility to help make the laws. That's what I mean. And I really want everyone in the community to feel comfortable bringing up an issue, because then we can actually look at, is this something that works for us? Is it something we would want to change? There may be something new that's happening, like in this case, drone displays rather than fireworks displays that we can all learn about. And rather than just assuming that because something has been written in law, it has to stay that way, or assuming that because something hasn't been regulated before, it can't be, we should always be asking these questions. And this was a good example for me of something where I hadn't thought that deeply about it. And once I looked into it some more, I felt like we are unique, but for a good reason, and one that I'm still comfortable with. And we don't know that unless we actually go in and look more deeply. So I want to say thank you for raising this issue in particular, and also thank you for the opportunity to come and be part of the conversation.
Now, before the series finale of Upton Speaks closes, I want to give some closing reflections. First, I started this podcast as there had been a lot going on here in the United States for the past year and a half. Basically, there had been many executive orders that were signed to shut some things down, such as the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the organization that funds the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, and National Public Radio, NPR, and many other things that, unfortunately, the current president has been doing that has impacted many Americans. So the main reason why I started Upton Speaks is to try and advocate for the saving of America's democracy, because we don't want to see democracy in America get destroyed by the president and his conservatives. Now, second, you might have noticed that throughout this series, the guests and we didn't refer to the president and other officials, like other political people, by name. Most of those people that we refer to were conservatives. And you might be wondering, had you forgot the names of those people? Well, I already know who they are, but I decided that to avoid upsetting anyone, I decided that I would not mention the names of those people, mostly conservatives. I will only mention their positions, like president, vice president, and other positions. So that's that. And finally, I hope that this podcast will impact future generations of advocates to try and fight for the saving of our democracy in this country. I always believed that Upton Speaks, along with many other programs that talks about issues, could help spread more awareness of everything that's been currently going on. And let's hope that the United States will still be a great country to live in for the rest of our lives. The end of Upton Speaks won't mark the end of my time at BevCam. I'll still be there doing a few other projects, at least doing editing on other people's shows for BevCam, but I'll hopefully do some occasional filming for other stuff there. So I'll still be around, and I'll continue to thrive at BevCam. Thanks for watching and or listening to Upton Speaks. This has been Thomas Upton speaking. This podcast was recorded at BevCam in Beverly, Massachusetts, United States. Find us on all your favorite podcast platforms and BevCam's YouTube and public access cable TV channels. Thanks to our guest, Hannah Bowen.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And once again, thanks for watching and or listening to the series finale of Upton Speaks. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I've enjoyed presenting it for the past few months, and thank you. This is Thomas Upton, signing off.
I love that moment that we all have seen, I think, at this point, with Fred Rogers sitting before Congress and bringing it right down to the ground and helping us understand that it's his funding empowered him to speak to each child and help them understand that each child is special. I get choked up just thinking about that moment because it's so specifically what is different about non-commercial public media, that we understand the need for making information accessible, for making media fun and unharmful, and for helping empower people to learn and therefore make their best choices and be their best versions of themselves.
I see advocacy as supporting other people or supporting yourself in a way that gets you what you need and what you deserve. Activism, I feel, is more like our protests, where we're actually having getting a large group of people together and getting the word out. I feel like that's more activism. So I'm a big fan of both, and I think they're both incredibly important, and as long as it's peaceful.
Minneapolis, when they were having their ICE raids, there are lots of Norwegians who live there, and they decided to start a Red Hat project, which was used in World War II to identify their objection to Nazis. And so they knit these specific designed red hats, which I brought a couple with me so I can show the audience. And it was to be able to demonstrate without speaking their objections to what the Nazis were doing. in World War II.
So this was a unique election coming into this role. Our previous state representative, who was reelected in the last regular election in November 2024, was then appointed to be a district court judge. And that's an incredible opportunity. He's well suited to that role. And so he moved into that role at the beginning of 2025, and there was a special election called. So it was a quick turnaround to decide in December of 2024 that I would get into that election when it was announced he would be taking up that role and there would be a vacancy. And then the final election was in May last year. So I've just crossed the 1 year mark in office.